something like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Do you have any Lord of the Rings fans in the house? And even if you haven't read the books, even if you're like a super core Lord of the Rings fan like myself, and just watch the movies, but the movie, it starts off with that epic battle.
Yes.
3,000 years ago on Mount Doom, the humans and the orcs, they gathered to fight against Sauron and the enemies, the dark forces and everything. And it's such an epic backdrop that goes thousands of years before the story of Lord of the Rings ever begins. And having all of that history is what makes the story so much more powerful. Yep. And you don't even need to know all of the history, but just getting an idea, a scope of everything that builds up to the heroes is really, really helpful. And I think that this is what the Christmas story is that Jesus did not just appear out of nowhere and says, hey, this is a cool guy, let's make a story about him. No, there is so much that goes into the build-up, the pre-story before Jesus. And I think that's what I want to do a little bit of looking at to help you guys understand the Christmas story. So turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 1.
Wow.
Come on, bro.
So Matthew is one of the 4 Gospels of the story of Jesus. What is the Greco-Roman biography? And the Greco-Roman biographies are different to modern biographies. Modern biographies are focused on chronology, like, oh, this person was born on this day, at this time, they lived, they went to this school, then they got married, then it starts from the birth and ends at death. That's not really the focus of the Greco-Roman biographies. It was more focused on talking about the character. And they would focus on different parts of this person to illustrate a specific point. Matthew is written to the Jews. He wants to explain a distinctly Jewish story, and he begins by looking at a history of Judaism. Now, I don't know, do we have any Jews in the house? I'm not a Jew. But even if you don't come from a Jewish background, Christmas originates with the Jewish figures. So to understand Christmas, you need to understand the Jewish history and the Jewish faith. So in Matthew chapter 1, it says, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now the word genealogy is a bit of like a random abstract word that we don't really use in common language today. Other translations of it would say, this is an account of the origin of Jesus.
Right.
So what it is, it's explaining where Jesus comes from. That he isn't just some random person that shows up out of nowhere. No. There's an origin story. This is kind of like the prologue to what's going to be happening to the main event, the main story. And he says, the son of David, the son of Abraham. One of the things to understand about Jewish genealogies is that they didn't distinctly follow the son of this, the son of this, the son of this. So instead of saying Kolbe, the son of Giles, the son of Uri, the son of Jason, they would just say, okay, Giles and Uri are not important, so we're just going to say Kolbe, the son of Jason. They have no problem skipping and cutting out people. And so, but what it means is that these are the most important, most significant people in the story of Israel. Some of them were very good, some of them were very bad, but all of them were important, all of them were significant.
Okay.
So he starts off in verse 2. It says, Abraham was the father of Isaac. Abraham was the founder of Judaism. The story of Judaism, and really the story of Jesus, begins with Abraham. It says he's the father of Isaac. Now, if you guys have those fancy ribbons in your Bibles, if you do, you want to put that here, because what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be fleshing out the story a little bit more for you guys. So if we go to Genesis chapter 22, there's so much to the story of Abraham. I'm just going to focus on the climactic part at the end, where God renews his covenant. And I want to show you guys why Abraham is significant to Christmas. Because if there was no Abraham, there'd be no Christmas. So in Genesis 22, in verse 15, I'm going to be reading a lot of scriptures, so if maybe you don't get all of them, you can go back and check it out yourself in your own time. It says, the angel of the Lord called Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, All nations on earth will be blessed because you obey me. What this is God gives a promise to Abraham that he says, hey, you're going to become a powerful nation. You're going to be the father of Israel, the father of the Jewish nation. And he says, your offspring, singular, there's going to be one specific offspring that is going to change the entire world. In Matthew, it says, Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. So, Abraham's grandson, Jacob, is another significant figure. Isaac is important as well, but for the sake of time, we'll just try and really focus. I'm condensing 4,000 years of history into a short sermon. But Genesis chapter 28. So we're going to look at Jacob. So Genesis chapter 28 in verse 13. So this is Jacob's dream. He has a dream where he encounters God. And it says, there before stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out from the west to the east, to the north to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Again, God renews this covenant with Abraham's grandson Jacob and says, you are going to have a special offspring. There's going to be a special person that's going to come from you, from your line, that is going to impact the entire world.
Come on.
So Jacob had 12 sons, and one of the 12 sons was Judah. Now, if we go to Genesis chapter 49, so one of the things that's significant about Judah is that Judah began as very evil and ended as very good. Is that Judah was not the firstborn. He was not supposed to be the person that was going to continue on the family line. It should have been someone else. But Judah was special. He was chosen by God. And in Genesis 49, it says in verse 10, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nation shall be his. So it says, Judah is going to produce a ruler. There's going to be this singular king. The scepter is not going to pass from Judah until this person comes to power. Now if we go back to Matthew, so it says in verse 3, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. So one of the things interesting about Matthew's genealogy is it includes women. Is that in Judaism was a patriarchal society, they didn't care about women. We care about women, amen?
Amen.
And we know that Jesus cares about women. Women were significant in Jesus' story. They were important enough to be written down. And Tamar was the first of 5 very significant women because Tamar was the person that changed Judah. Is that she was the one that turned his heart from being very, very evil to where he plotted and schemed, he betrayed his brother, he sold him into slavery. He almost even killed Tamar, but because of her actions, she was able to change his heart and forevermore change the story of Jesus' lineage. Wow. So Tamar is very important. Yeah. It says Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. So each of these genealogies and each of these generations is significant for their own reasons. But we skip down now to Boaz. And Boaz was significant because of his mother. Who was his mother? It was Rahab the prostitute. So Rahab the prostitute was someone who was not a Jew. She was the enemy of Israel, but because of her faith in God, she was accepted, she was saved by God, and it shows that it doesn't matter what background or society you come from, is that Jesus is for all people. Even the dregs of society, even the prostitutes are still important to God, and they're important to God's story. It says immediately after that, Boaz, why is he significant? Because he's the one that takes care of Ruth. Who was Ruth? Ruth was the Moabite. She was the enemy of God's people. is that these were the people that opposed God. But because of Ruth, again, it doesn't matter whether you're from the dregs, the bottom of society, or whether you're the mortal enemy, is that all of these people are significant in bringing together the story of Jesus. Are you with me, guys?
Yeah.
So it says that Ruth was the mother of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. So we've gone here from Abraham, the founder of the Judaism, all the way to David. Now, why is David significant? David was the person that united Israel. Is that he was the first king after God's own heart that really unified Israel as a nation. And he was the most powerful king. If we go to Psalm chapter 89.
Come on, Kolbe.
Go.
So Psalm chapter 89 in verse 20. Amen when you get there.
Amen.
The Bible says, this is God speaking about David, it says, I have found David my servant, with my sacred oil I have anointed him. Verse 28, I will maintain my love to him forever, and my covenant with him will never fail. I will establish his line forever, his throne as long as the heavens endure. So David was the first great king of Israel, and God gives him a promise that his line will be established forever. There will be a perpetual kingship of David's lineage throughout Israel. This is a pretty powerful. This is a pretty powerful promise from God to David. Back to Matthew, it says David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. That is an awesome story as well. We're not going to go into it today, but Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. So Solomon was David's son. And if we go to 1 Kings chapter 9, we see God's promise to Solomon. So this is all taking place 1,000 years before Jesus. So Abraham, he's about 2,000 years before Jesus. All these different kings. David's 1,000 years. His son Solomon is 1,000 years before Jesus. So this is lots and lots of backstory that Matthew is very, very swiftly reminding the Jews of where they come from and where Jesus comes from. So in 1 Kings chapter 9, in verse 4, so God appears to Solomon and says, as for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command or observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. So again, we see God is confirming his promise to Solomon just as he promised David. This is very powerful. You think that this family is going to be established as the rulers of Israel forever. Now, unfortunately, after Solomon, it says Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the king that divided the nation of Israel. He instituted a civil war that was going to divide and separate. And this would have been a very tragic point in Israel's history. That they would have been saddened by this. That David, he reigned Israel justly. He was a man after God's own heart. But Rehoboam split the kingdom. There's Abijah, the father of Asa. Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat. So Asa was an amazing king. He sought God with all of his heart. He brought people together. Jehoram, the father of Uzziah. Again, this was a mighty king that led Judah powerfully and was very faithful to God. Uzziah, the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Who is Hezekiah? This was one of the kings that ruled during the time of Isaiah the prophet. Hezekiah was the one that took a stand against the empire of Assyria. He was the one that was besieged by an army of 185,000 warriors. And because he cried out to God, God answered him and rescued him from the enemy, wiped out the army, and protected Jerusalem. These are the kings that Matthew is reminding people of the history of Israel. It says, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amnon, Amnon the father of Josiah. Josiah was the last great king of Judah. He was the last one. He brought about a religious revival. He brought people back to God. But unfortunately, after he died, this is when the Babylonian Empire came and conquered and enslaved Israel and Judah. It says, and Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, at the time of the exile to Babylon. So this is where we see that the first section is focusing on the patriarchs of where Israel comes from. The second section is focused on the kings, the monarchy. And it ends with the exile, where Babylon comes, conquers Judah, conquers Jerusalem, and brings the people away into captivity. This was another extreme low point in the history of Israel. And it says, after the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. So if we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 3. I'm not losing you guys, am I?
No.
Good.
Got a lot of study though.
I know. So in 1 Chronicles 3, this details the line of the kings. And in verse 17, it says, the descendants of Jehoiachin the captive, Shealtiel his son, Milcram, Hananiah, Shemazar, Jechemiah, Hoshama, Nebadiah, the sons of Pedadiah, Zerubbabel and Shemi, the sons of Zerubbabel, and it goes on to list these different sons. And so why is this significant is it is showing that even after the exile, even after the Jerusalem is destroyed, there's still this little fragment of the line. Is that, again, if you think of Lord of the Rings, I really like Lord of the Rings, you think of Aragorn, you see this kingship goes, the line was supposed to be destroyed. But again, you see this hero emerge, and you can show that he came from it, like, right? Is that J.R.R. Tolkien didn't come up with this. This is the Bible. The Bible is the one that came up with this. So if we go back, so after the exile, you have the final prophet, which is Malachi. So Malachi, he's the final prophet, and then it goes silent for 400 years. There's nothing from God. No word, no prophet, no nothing. And you see that after the exiles, it's a time of silence, of questioning, of wondering. And it goes on to list Zerubbabel, the father of Abihud, Abihud, the father of Eliakim, Eliakim, the father of Azor, Azor, the father of Zadok, Zadok, the father of Akim, Akim, the father of Elihud, Elihud, the father of Eleazar, Eleazar, the father of Mathan, Mathan, the father of Jacob, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. This Messiah had been prophesied and had been waited for thousands of years. And especially during this silent years of 400, Matthew has gone and has done his research. And the inspiring thing as a Jew is that if you read this, you could go investigate it for yourself. You could find out, okay, you have all these genealogies, do the actual match up? And you could do what I've just shown you. You could go back to the Old Testament, you could go back to the Chronicles, you could go back to the lineages to show actually this holds water. It actually makes sense, this lineage that Matthew has put forward. So this is 2,000 years of backstory to lead us to the birth of Jesus. So this is our introduction to the story of Christmas. It says, thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David. 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. It says in verse 18, this is how the birth of Jesus came about. Again, that's a very weak-worded English translation for it. I much prefer the origin of the Messiah, of Jesus the Messiah, was like this. It said, this is where Jesus comes from. It says, his mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. So, we got to picture this, is that these two people are pledged to be married, and the woman is found to be pregnant. Now, even in today's society, we have a hypersexualized, very promiscuous, is that if a woman's supposed to be married and she's found to be pregnant and it's not the guy, that's a big deal, right? It would have been an even bigger deal here, is that this was a complete scandal. This would have rocked the entire society. And it says, Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had a mind to divorce her quietly. So Joseph is like, this is not cool, this is wrong, I'm not going to stand for this. But you still see he's a good guy. Is that he's not trying to publicly disgrace her. Is that this could have ruined a person's life if they were found to be unfaithful while they were pledged to be married to someone. It says, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. So the angel comes to him and says, Joseph, son of David. This angel, in one line, is reminding him of his heritage. That you descend from the great King David. You are a man after God's own heart. Let me tell you about what's happening here. And explains that she's not pregnant through natural means. She hasn't been unfaithful. It's been a supernatural event that's taken place. It says in verse 22, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Now, so there's some strange traditions that speak about the perpetual virginity of Mary and stuff. The Bible explicitly says that Jesus had brothers and sisters. So that Mary wasn't a virgin her entire life, but she was up until the point that Jesus was born. This is an extraordinary supernatural claim that no one in the history, no one has even attempted to claim this. That I was born supernaturally through a virgin mother. Wow. Right? If you're going to make up a false story, that's not how you would begin. Right? Right? So he says, okay, well, this is to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. So let's go back to Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7. So Isaiah was one of the many prophets of Israel that prophesied. He prophesied during a number of kings through Hezekiah. He was there. But this is when he's speaking to King Ahaz. And it says in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 13, then Isaiah said, hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel.
Come on.
He'll be eating curds and honey, and when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, for before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on the house of your father a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria. Now, Isaiah was not written in English, it was written in Hebrew. And the translators have borrowed heavily from other parts of the Bible to explain what's happening here. Because the word here that's translated as virgin, in the Hebrew, what it is it's alma. And what it means is a young woman of marriageable age. Now, in Jewish society, it would have been implied and expected. Of course, she would have naturally been a virgin, because it was not acceptable to have sex outside of marriage. And so, but what it's talking about, it's not talking about this supernatural birth that's going to take place in this instant. Is that Isaiah is prophesying 700 years before, he's prophesying 700 years before Jesus, is that he has a specific message to give to this king Ahaz. This message would have been relevant to King Ahaz 700 years before. It's speaking about these kingdoms, this empire of Assyria that's threatening him. He says, hey, this is going to happen. He's speaking figuratively about a woman giving birth to someone who's going to then bring God to be with him. He says, hey, this is just a time of encouragement. I know you're oppressed on all sides by these enemies, these two kingdoms that are threatening you, but good news, God is going to be with you. And when Ahaz heard this, he's like, great, God's going to be with me. This is good news. And up until this point, that's how people took it. It's because this prophecy, it had an immediate message. It had an immediate fulfillment. But what Matthew is showing 700 years later, he says, okay, I know that this prophecy had an immediate fulfillment with Ahaz. I know it was talking about Assyria, but it also has a second meaning in addition. It's not figuratively talking about a young woman or figuratively this woman giving birth. No. It's a literal young woman who's a virgin who's going to be giving birth to this leader, Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And some people are like, oh, well, that's mighty convenient just saying that this prophecy means this or this prophecy means that. But no, it makes it more difficult to be fulfilled if it has to be fulfilled multiple times and in multiple ways. Are you with me, guys? And so the fact that these prophecies have an immediate fulfillment and a future messianic fulfillment shows the layers. That this is a very complex, multifaceted story that goes into Jesus.
Come on.
So if we go back to Matthew chapter 2. You guys still with me, yeah? So it says in chapter 2, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, the Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So this is first century Palestine, is that you have two major empires. So you have the Roman Empire to the west, and you have the former Babylonian, Persian, which is now the Parthian Empire to the east. And these magi, what they would have been is they're described as kings in some ways, or wise men. They most likely what they would have been is they would have been astrologers. That they would have studied the stars and they would have interpreted them to communicate about world events. And this would have been used, there's numerous ancient writings about Cyrus, the king of Persia, overthrowing the kingdom of Babylon, is that these people believed that you could interpret major world events from the skies. And they noticed this supernatural cosmological event that they said, hey, there's some sort of major event that's taking place. And they would have traveled from their home to a foreign country to have investigated it. This was so big that they felt it was worth their time and energy and money to travel to find out about this. And if you think of this story, it's crazy. They go to the king, Herod, and they say to him, "Where's the king of the Jews?" Right? Is that, have you ever heard this story? There's an evil king reigning over this kingdom, and they're waiting for the young person who's born from a prophecy who's going to come and to save the kingdom from the evil king. Yes? It came from this. This is the original story. Jesus is the original hero. That every other fantasy mythological story comes from this. And who was Herod? Herod wasn't the real king. He wasn't supposed to be the king. Is that Herod, he wasn't even a Jew. He was like a half-Jew. He was an Edomite, which comes from the descendants of Esau, which were, again, the enemies of Israel. And Herod, his father, was Antipas, the Idumean, and he worked with the Romans. He worked with Julius Caesar, he worked with Pompey, and so he was a Roman puppet that was put in place by Rome. Herod was a Roman puppet that people didn't recognize. They didn't respect him as the king. And even these magi from a foreign country, they're like, "Look, Herod, so where's the real king? We've come to find this real king." Because these people were scholars. They were not Jews. This was not their religion, but they were very well informed about world events. And they studied out the ancient Hebrew texts to find out about this Hebrew king. If we go to Jeremiah, we see that these wise men, they recognized there was a specific prophecy that they were looking for. In Jeremiah chapter 23, so Jeremiah prophesies, this is, about 500, 600 years before Jesus. And he's prophesying when Israel's being conquered by the Babylonians. This is a very dark time for Israel, is that they're scattered, they're weak, they're vulnerable. And he gives this prophecy from God in verse 5. It says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. A king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which it will be called, the Lord, our righteous Savior.
Amen.
The Hebrew name is Yehovah Sedek. They were waiting for this king who was going to come from the line of David, who was going to save Judah, save Israel from the enemies. Is that when this prophecy took place, Israel was being conquered by the Babylonians. And 600 years later, Israel was still being hounded by the enemies, but now their new enemies, they're the Romans. And they wanted to be delivered. And the wise men are like, hey, we understand that there's some sort of major world event is about to happen. Who is the king that's going to free you from your enemies? We want to come and to find him and to worship him. They said that we saw his star. Again, these were astrologers. They studied the skies to interpret the events of the day. If you go to Numbers, chapter 24, so we've looked at numerous prophecies about Jesus, but these are from Jewish prophets. But now we're going to look at a non-Jewish prophet that gives a prophecy about Jesus. This was actually one of the enemies of the Israelites. He was brought by the king of Moab to give a prophecy against Israel, but he was not able to. In Numbers chapter 24, in verse 17, it says this: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the people of Sheph. Edom will be conquered. Seir's enemy will be conquered, but Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. Is that when this prophecy was given to the king of Moab, is that Israel was invading the land, and he was terrified. And remember, just as I said, is that the prophecies, they have an immediate message for the immediate audience, but they also have a messianic message that's seen hundreds or thousands of years later. And with this is that it says a star will come out of Jacob. This word for star, it means blazing or rolling. It's a power. And it's figurative, it's talking about a ruler. It's like there's going to be this leader that's going to come up out of Jacob that's going to conquer all of the people. Now, there's a few people that this obviously is talking about. I think Joshua, who is the current leader of the Israelites, who went and conquered the Moabites, the Edomites. He conquered all of the enemies. Another obvious person that fits this description is David. He explicitly conquered the Moabites, the Edomites. He conquered all of these people. He crushed his enemies. But as we see from the story of Jesus, that Jesus is not interested in using force or power to crush and to defeat his enemies. Is that Jesus, he had a Moabite in his story. Jesus cares about the Moabites. He cares about all these Edomites, all of these people. Is that these astrologers, they come to Herod and they're saying like, okay, where's the star? Look at this prophecy. I say, no, this isn't figurative. There's a literal star in the sky that we've never seen before, we can't explain. And we've studied all the other religions. Is that these guys were not Jews. They would have gone to all their other major faiths to try to find an explanation. And the only people that could explain these cosmological events were the Jews. And they said, we want to find your Jewish king. The person that's been prophesied about for thousands of years, because we understand that he comes from God. It says, verse 3, when King Herod heard this, Matthew chapter 2. I know I'm jumping around here. Matthew chapter 2, verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. These people are afraid, they're threatened that their power is going to be changed or challenged. It says, when he called them together, all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem, in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you has come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. This is another prophecy from the prophet Micah. Again, he was a contemporary of Isaiah. And what Matthew is doing in his story of Jesus is he's masterfully weaving all of these different Old Testament prophets and prophecies to show where Jesus comes from. He's reminding the Jews of their history, that all of these different prophecies are being fulfilled. Is that no other major leader in history had prophecies about them. There's no prophecies about Muhammad. There's no prophecies about Buddha. There's no prophecies about any of these other people. But Matthew is showing all of these prophecies to support Jesus. It says in verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found them for the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Again, these are not Jews. This is not their religion. These are scholars, they're academics. But these guys can recognize from the stars, from the cosmos, that this is a supernatural event. This person is sent by God, and this person is worthy of worship. Is that this is Jesus' birth shook the world so much that even the non-believers could not deny the power that he had come from.
Wow.
It says, then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Is that we talk about the three kings. Well, first of all, we don't know how many there were. There could have been 3, there could have been 40. We don't know how many wise men. They're just plural, so there's more than 2. Right? There's more than 1. There's 2 at least. And they gave 3 different types of gifts. Now, all of these gifts would have been very rare, very precious commodities. Gold is gold. But they, more than just being money, they have intrinsic symbolic value. And what Matthew's doing is he's giving a powerful foreshadowing of what's going to come later on in the story of Jesus. Because the gold is symbolic of Jesus' kingship. What the Magi are doing is they're showing that we recognize you are the true king of Israel. This guy Herod is a pretender. The Romans don't have authority. You're the one with authority over the Jewish people. Frankincense, what it was a gum or a resin that was used for sacrifice. It was used in the spiritual priestly duties. And so what they're showing is that what is happening in Israel is that there was a divide between the political power and the spiritual power. Is that the king did his political stuff, the priest did his priestly stuff. But what they recognized that, no, this leader was going to be both the king and the priest. He's going to serve in a political function and in a spiritual function. The priest was the person that mediated between the people and God. And what these wise men recognized is that, hey, you are someone that's sent from God, and we understand that you are going to mediate between the people of Israel and God in a spiritual capacity. Lastly, they have myrrh. What was myrrh used for? Myrrh was used in the burial process. Is that it was used for embalming the body after it had died. And this is a powerful foreshadowing to show that something in Jesus' story is going to involve his death. Is that he is going to have an influential and powerful death that is going to change the people of Israel. It says, after having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Is that these people, they weren't interested in changing the world. They didn't want to have the political instability or anything like that. They just came for this epic event. They wanted to come. They wanted to worship this king. And then they're like, okay, we're going to go home now. Because they didn't care about Herod. They didn't care about the Romans. They didn't care about anything else. All they cared about was Jesus.
Come on.
And I think that as we look at all of these different epic stories with different heroes, we love this hero that comes from humble beginnings. That was Jesus. The hero that leads the people. The hero that saves the world. And the greatest heroes are the ones that do it through self-sacrifice. This is who Jesus is. This is this epic story that completely changed the world. It changed the world in his day, and it's still changing the world 2,000 years on from this. This is the Christmas story. This is why we're gathered here. This is why we have fancy jumpers. This is why we celebrate, we have food and things like that. It's all because of Jesus. And I think that Why do I tell you all of this? It's good for people to know, because I think people have such a warped view of Christmas. They think that it's Jesus, this little babe lying in a manger with like cattle and everything around. That's not what it was. Is that this was a world-changing event that had been prophesied about thousands of years. It completely changed the nation of Israel, but it also changed the surrounding nations. Is that Jesus changed the world for the Jews, but he also changed it for the Gentiles. Is that none of us are Jews, but we're still impacted by Jesus' birth.
Yeah.
And I think that I have a challenge for, I think there's two groups of people in here. There are the people that are Christians, that are devout, God-fearing people, that love God, love the Bible, they love Jesus, all of that. But I think there's so many people that don't know about Jesus. They don't really know the story. That they don't. Matthew has done an incredible job weaving this beautiful tapestry of prophecy and history all together to remind the Jews of who they are and who Jesus is. But I think for us as Christians, we need to know this. We need to be able to explain to people what Christmas is. Is that people don't even say that. Is that they've taken Jesus out of Christmas. They don't even say Christmas, just Xmas. Right? And happy holidays. Because they don't want, in that political correctness, is that we need to say, no, this is Christmas.
Yep.
We're celebrating the birth of Jesus.
Amen.
The most influential birth in all of human history. Is that I do not apologize for celebrating this birth. Is that whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, whether you believe in Jesus, whether you don't, is that there's no denying. Just like the Magi, you cannot deny the impact that this person's birth had on the world. And I think we need to be able to articulate, to explain that to other people when they ask us why we're celebrating Christmas. I think for the other group of people, the people that, hey, you don't really know God, you're not walking with God, you're not close to God, is that I share this with you to inspire you.
Yeah.
Is that Jesus is the greatest hero ever. He has the most epic story. Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, all of these other stories. When you look at Jesus' story and you look at these people, they mirror Jesus almost exactly. Every other hero and every other story wants to be just like Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is the greatest hero. And I want to really inspire you to look into the story of Jesus, understanding who he is, because the world has characterized Jesus. They don't understand who he is or what he did. And I would really challenge you to study the Bible. Whoever invited you to study the Bible to find out more about him, more about this transformational leader that changed the world in his day, is still changing the world, but like Rachel said, is changing people's individual lives. This is the power, is that he's not some great ethereal figure or character that we just study in school. No, he's personal. He personally has an influence on each and every one of your lives. And I want to challenge you guys to find out about that.
Yeah.
The story of Jesus is the greatest thing that ever happened to my life. 3.5 years ago, truly understanding who Jesus, truly understanding what he did for my life. And I think that's why I love Christmas so much. Christmas is one of my favorite times of the year to come and to celebrate Jesus, because Jesus is the greatest hero ever, and I think that Jesus' story is the greatest story ever. So, this is a Christmas story, and I invite you guys to come and to celebrate with us. We're going to have some food, and to find out more about the story afterwards. So thank you guys very much.